So I remember running my first marathon. I ran 26.2 miles in Houston, Texas on purpose. And so I got prepared for this. I put in miles on miles of training. I asked for expert advice from those who had run marathons before me. And every veteran marathoner said, you must prepare for the wall. And the wall is this term that describes this moment, usually around mile 20, the 20-mile marker, when your body is just racked with fatigue, you are out of energy, and all you want to do is stop. And so I ran my first marathon. Things are going smoothly. And around mile 19 for me, my body was just racked with fatigue, and all I wanted to do was stop. I saw the curb next to me, and I could just imagine curling up on the curb and just taking a little nap. But I remembered, and I prepared for this. I remembered my training. I recalled how I trained for this, and so I pressed on. I kept going. It wasn't pretty, but I was still making progress. About a mile through the wall, I heard bagpipes in the distance, and I love bagpipes. And I wasn't quite sure what it was yet, but I knew it wasn't my funeral march. Like, I'm not dead yet. I'm still moving forward. And as I got closer to the sound of the bagpipes, I recognized the song. It was Amazing Grace. And so I see the bagpiper, I hear the song clearly. I started to run with my arms like wide open in worship and my head back, and I'm weeping because I love Jesus and I'm in this very exhausted state. And I realized I can't run 4 more miles with my arms out. So I tucked back in and I finished strong. And at the finish line, my wife April was waiting for me and she kissed me. Now, if you have been in ministry for more than a minute, you know that ministry is not a sprint. Ministry is a marathon, and every pastor must respect the distance. We will hit the wall, and the wall will hit back. It will hurt, but this hurt is not permanent. Maybe you call it seasonal depression, or you call it going through a rough patch, or maybe you call it a never-ending church business meeting. Whatever you call it, there will be seasons, and it's going to hurt. The struggle is real. One time I hit a wall in ministry, and the wall hit back. To say one time is to indicate there have been many times in the past, and I can predict there will be some regularity of the walls hitting in the future for as long as I do church work, because church work is messy. People are messy. I am messy. And I recognize one of my hard times in ministry, I felt like a complete and utter failure as a husband. I felt like a failure as a dad. I felt like a failure as a pastor, and so I needed help. And I got help from a group of pastors. There was a group of pastors going through a recovery program where we could kind of reveal some of our core issues and increase our celebration of God's amazing grace. And as I walked with these pastors through our issues, I had this incredible self-discovery. It was like I was completely, fully aware of my messiness. I couldn't hide it. I couldn't minimize it. It was just out there. So I discovered this about myself, that I am a mess. And so I remember driving home to my wife. I came home and I said, honey, I discovered something about myself and I want to get better. And if you want to get your spouse's undivided attention, you just start with a sentence like that. I know something about myself and I want to get better. And so with my wife's complete undivided attention, I told her, honey, I am a mess. And my wife is so compassionate, so loving, and I expected her to just embrace me, hug me, encourage me. She opted for the truth and tough love that day, and she said, I know. And the beauty of the fact she knew I was a mess, but she was still with me. She still cared for me. She still encouraged me, listened, loved me. She still kissed me. That brought great peace. I know that there are tough times coming in this world. This world, you will have troubles, Jesus said, but He gives us His peace. And so I have this incredible peace knowing that when I come into a hard time, I hit the wall, I know that it's not permanent. Most often it's not even personal, even though I make it personal. But acknowledging the messiness of ministry is like acknowledging the wall in a marathon, knowing it's coming. And so I have like top 10 signs that I know that I'm about to hit the wall, or maybe I'm in the midst of a mess right then. And I probably have some experience, from 25 years of ministry, and I might have some things in common with you. As I share this list, you might go, hey, me too, I struggle with that as well. So my top 10 signs I'm hitting a wall in ministry. Number 10, lack of Sabbath. Number 9, an unsustainable pace in ministry and in life. And number 8, I cuss at the dog. Maybe you don't have a dog, but for me, that's one of my check engine flags. I don't cuss at my wife or my kids. I love my dog, but he's always under my feet. And if I catch myself cussing at my dog, it's like, hey, check engine, something's wrong. Check the systems. Are you rested enough? Are you having a Sabbath? Is your pace sustainable? Number 7, like physical red flags. I think God hardwires these into all of us. A few for me is like, I'll get psoriasis on my face, or I get migraines as well. And I've even got a heart condition. Sometimes that makes me aware things are not sustainable. You're hitting a wall. You need to address the mess, address the tension, pay attention to that tension. Number 6, a lack of fellowship with other pastors. This is not intentional necessarily that I'm avoiding other pastors, but there's such a beauty in the fellowship with each other. So if I'm not around other pastors, I'm probably going to be in a dangerous position, isolated where I don't need to be. So number 5, the need for constant noise. Number 4, I assume the worst of people at church. And number 3, I see myself as the victim. And number 2, just an overall lack of prayer and a lack of Bible meditation. And the number one way I know that I am hitting a wall is when I fantasize about living in a van down by the river. Maybe you catch that old reference from Saturday Night Live. But I realize when I just want to be away from everyone, even my own family, that gets to me to a scary point where I go, why do I want to be by myself so much? That's a warning sign. This stuff is not right, and I hit a wall, and times are messy. And so now ask yourself, are you a mess? I mean, do we have any similarities in those top 10 lists? And if you have the boldness and the courage to ask the person who knows you best, just ask them, am I a mess? And then be prepared for unfiltered honesty. If you are a mess, what are you going to do about it? Like, it's okay to not be okay. You just can't stay there. We get some help. And one of the things that helps me during the times of tension and tough times, hitting the wall, when my life is messy, like I run to good advice from people who have been there before. Like listen to podcasts, read some good books. This book, Wayne Cordero's Leading on Empty, has been incredibly helpful. It's good content, but I think it's most helpful for me because of who wrote it. It's Wayne Cordero. If you don't know who this is, just Google one of his sermons or one of the conferences he spoke at for a second. I saw him at a conference for the first time, I don't know, decades ago, and I immediately liked him. He's a likable guy. He comes on stage, he's charismatic, he's got this big magic smile. He's strong, he's fit, he leads a growing church in Hawaii. I mean, how could you not like Wayne Cordero? And so if he writes a book about his mess, about him hitting the wall, it kind of makes me realize none of us escapes this. And so I'll share a few insights from chapter 2 of this book. Like Wayne Cordero describes the wall, and he describes in ministry, it almost gets on this dangerous track, and there's this trappings of you feel so important in ministry, but after a while, everyone just wants more and more of you. And there's a point where it can be imprisoning. In fact, he says on page 34, but now ministry made me feel imprisoned. Right, so there must be warning signs for ministers when they begin to find all of their identity in the importance of ministry. So if you'll forgive me and allow me a crude example, I believe that if we find all of our identity in the importance of ministry, eventually that importance will imprison you. And an imprisoned minister is an impotent minister. And so my question for you is, where has your ministry dangerously shaped your identity? Question number 2, is there a difference between solitude and isolation? Wayne Cordero spent some time in a monastery with a bunch of monks who took a vow of silence. It was an intentional time of solitude, to seek the face of God, to sit at the feet of Jesus. The danger for us, though, is when we become so isolated, extended seasons of isolation where we don't hear the voices of trusted friends or loved ones or the scriptures, when those aren't speaking to us in ways that we would allow them to change us. So embrace solitude like Jesus. He would withdraw from the crowds to have solitude with the Father, but watch out for isolation. So there's the trap. Wayne Cordero said it like this. He says, when he was seeking after God, he says, I didn't receive an answer but I gained resolve necessary to press forward. A third question for us to consider is, would you rather have peace or understanding? Like, you put those things on a scale. Which one do you want? Which one weighs more in your life? Is it the peace or the understanding? You know I'm about to quote the Bible, right? So go Philippians 4:7. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So for me, when I hit the wall, when times get tough, I have to double down on the helpful rhythms and the helpful resources. And one of my greatest resources has been with me since I was a 6-year-old boy, the first time I learned to ride a bike without training wheels. That incredible sense of freedom, I still feel that when I ride the bike. So most days at sunset, after dinner and the dishes are done, I ride my bike, even if it's just for a mile. It's so freeing. I feel like there's that moment of solitude with Jesus in his nature. I'm not looking at a screen. I'm just surrounded by God's green earth, and it is good. Solitude with God. What's not good is the isolation. So if we go back to the marathon metaphor and imagine that we're running a marathon together, if you can imagine hitting 20 miles worth of running, being on your feet, and imagine mile 20 and the wall hits and you just want to stop. And usually at mile 20 and about every other mile of a marathon, they have porta potties set up. Because when nature calls and you on a race, you got to go and you got to go. Imagine there's a porta potty at mile 20, because it's probably there. But imagine you go in there and you never get back out. You just stay in there. I mean, who could imagine staying for an elongated time in a porta potty anyway? It stinks. So does your life in ministry when you just hunker down in your own little isolated cubicle, stinking thinking, your mind goes to the worst places and you play the victim and everyone else is the villain. So if you find yourselves in a time of tension, pay attention to that tension and don't stay in the stinking porta potty too long. That is going to be like breeding ground for all kinds of elongated depression. So do not isolate, instead find the solitude and then find a good group of friends who will offer peace, the peace that passes all understanding that Christ has promised us, because this will guard our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus.